Motorcycle Adventure Dirtbike TV is proudly supported by Adventure Spec in England, Rally Raid Products, Giant Loop in the United States, Adventure Moto in Australia, and Adventure Rider Magazine.
Motorcycle Adventure Dirtbike TV is testing the Husqvarna 701 long range to see if it's a viable alternative adventure mount and how it stacks up against the popular mid-sized twins. It kicks off with some impressive figures: 500 kilometre range and a dry weight of 155 kilograms, tens of kilos lighter than those twins. It's tempting to pigeonhole the 701 LR as just a big trail bike, but I have a feeling that would be a mistake. One way to find out: punch out a couple of thousand Ks and look at this bike through the eyes of an adventure rider that wants a versatile and capable mount that can comfortably tackle long distances and take on the rough stuff.
What the hell did I hit then? Oh, you're kidding me.
It's not the best way to kick off a review when you drop the bike, but you know what? For this bike, it was a great way to test the polyamide tanks that give the Husky 701 500 kilometres of range. Welcome to my review of the 2020 Husqvarna 701 long range. Over the last couple of weeks, I've done thousands of kilometres on this bike. The majority of those sessions have been one-day rides of 300 to 500 kilometres looping out of Sydney. And they've been in a range of different stuff, from tight technical trails right down to the open stuff where you can just loaf along. And then finally, I took the bike on a 2-day adventure to test its adventure credentials. Just like many motorcycle adventurers throughout the world, I live in the suburbs of a city, and for me, that's Sydney, Australia. Australia is blessed with endless kilometres of adventure trails. The closest are about an hour and a half from home, a weave through suburbia and then a blast down the freeway for an hour or two, and I'm into the bush. So road manners of this bike are important to me. But first things first, and what struck me when I kicked my leg over the Husky was how light it was. Lately, I've been spending a lot of time on mid-range twins of similar engine capacity and power, and this bike felt so light in comparison, even when pushing it around the garage. Seat height is 925 mils, and on the tall side for an adventure mount. I'm 178 centimetres or 5 foot 10 inches tall, and that seat height put me on the balls of my feet. But what you get for that extra seat height is long travel suspension. For me, the seat height was perfect. However, after speaking with many average skilled riders and shorter riders, seat height is an issue. The good news with the Husky is a factory standard suspension lowering kit is available. Out onto suburban streets, and the engine power delivery makes you smile. It's a very generous delivery that pulls from low revs. It's easy to ride in suburban traffic and loaf along, but it also has instantaneous grunt available to weave through traffic if you want. Well, my first 100 kilometres on the Husqvarna 701 long range. I've come from Sydney, done some freeway, done some blacktop, and we're at the top of Murray's Run Road and just about to head into the Waddingon Forest.
So initial impressions of that first 100 Ks. Well, it's a bit of a chilly day today, and one of the first things, I've been riding, mid-range, mid-size adventure twins for the last couple of months, and the thing that I missed immediately was a bit of fairing, just to stop the wind buffeting on your chest. If I was going to ride this bike long distance for adventure, that's the first thing I'd get, is a little bikini fairing. The engine is really good. It's very smooth and tractable, and yeah, it's a thumper, but it's basically so smooth it's like an electric engine, really. And it's very, very responsive on highway traffic, easily coped sitting on 110. And when you had to scoot around someone pretty quickly, you could do that, accelerated well. I've been sitting on the bike now for just over an hour. And at this stage, the seating on the bike is excellent. Don't have any problems, not too hard, not too soft. As Goldilocks would say, it's just right.
I ensured the first day of riding had a good mix of easy open adventure trails and some more technical stuff. The bike's dry weight is 155 kilograms, which is tens of kilograms lighter than equivalent sized twins. The bike feels lightweight and nimble, and despite carrying 25 litres of fuel on board, was agile. I think splitting the fuel weight front and rear certainly contributes to that feeling the bike is balanced. First impressions of the suspension was that it's sorted. Rocky fast stuff, open trails, the tight stuff, it just did it all well. We all know that it's the slow, tight stuff that scares the hell out of most average skill level adventure riders. The light weight of this bike and its agility gave me the confidence to take on trails I wouldn't like to do on a similar sized twin, and that's liberating. Firstly, the chances of falling over are less. Everyone has been there. You overbalance on those bigger bikes and you just don't have the strength to compensate, and over you go. On this bike, it's a hell of a lot lighter, and so you can just stop it falling in the first place.
Where am I heading with this?
And when you do fall over, it's easy to pick up.
What did I hit?
So I've had 350 Ks on the Husky 701 long range now, and I'm starting to get a very good appreciation of how it fits in terms of adventure. Very highly capable bike, handles like a 450. It makes you want to look for those single trails off to the side of the main trail because you know you can do it. The engine is really good. It's a very linear development of power, but it's very good like that, and can pull you out of anything. But I just wanted to talk about the adventure stance for a minute. So I've spent hours on the seat, and the seating position is really good, it's really comfortable. But I'd have to say, in the standing position, it's just a little bit too short for me for adventure riding, because I like standing on the pegs for long periods. The suspension, like I've been hitting really hard stuff, and as you'll see in the video later on, really big whoops and G-outs and then sharp rocky bits. The suspension takes that all perfectly. So all in all, a really impressive bike. Just needs a tiny tweak for me to adventurise it, but really that's nothing. You always do things to bikes when you get them anyway. So I've had the bike about a week now, and I've punched out a heap of dirt kilometres and taken it in some fairly technical trails. But now the test is a 2-day adventure out with Clubby again. Got my pack on the back, and we're going to some fantastic country up to Nundle. Lots of river crossings. It'll be interesting. It's been pouring down rain in the last couple of days, so it'll be interesting if we have to make detours.
The Sydney Nundle Loop pretty closely represents the type of motorcycle adventure that we ride in Australia. Generally long kilometres each day that include a range of surfaces. Due to filming commitments, there is a little more tar on this trip than normal, but that allows us to get into the good stuff quicker. With the boring freeway miles out of the way, we head into the Hunter Valley, into a stunning country that's recently seen a heap of rain. At slightly slower speeds, my desire to have a bikini fairing fades away. The bike cruises along at between 80 and 100 k's effortlessly. I found the engine didn't mind being kept in a high gear in the 50k zones in the country towns. It's a generous linear power, which makes the bike a great dual sporter and a great commuter if you want to buy the bike for work and play. I'm growing to like the easy shifter that does what it says. For the most part, gears can be shifted up or down without using the clutch, but I tended not to use it from first to second. When downshifting, the system matches engine speed to the speed of the lower gear. I could get amazing acceleration out of the bike by holding the throttle pretty well wide open and shifting up through the gears. I felt it was a lot faster than what I could do with a traditional gearbox. The easy shifter is just one feature of the bike that sets it apart from the traditional big trail bike. This bike is packed with technology that not only significantly improves rider experience, but also rider safety, and that's not obvious at first glance. On these tarred country roads, I kept the ride mode on setting 1. Setting 1 provides a more responsive throttle and cornering sensitive motorcycle traction control, or MTC, that minimises wheel slip and wheelies. MTC has lean angle sensitive traction control, and the MTC is constantly reviewing traction and within milliseconds can reduce engine output at the throttle valves to intervene and reduce slippage. For me, it means a little more peace of mind and improves safety. We all know that dual sport tyres are a compromise when it comes to grip on the tar. In wet or slippery conditions, they just don't give the grip that purpose-designed road tyres provide. Whilst I wouldn't completely rely on MTC to assist me take a corner that I've entered too hot, it is a valuable safety net that will help me from dropping it on the blacktop. Although it did the blacktop well, it was great to get the Husky on the dirt and settle in for a decent 2-day adventure ride. After recent rains, the country looks great. There's no dust and the bike eats up these type of miles effortlessly. The dirt-focused handling of this bike provides stability on slippery gravel roads. We're winding our way through the Great Dividing Range, and every now and again there's a temptation to let the Husky have its head.
So we're 170 k's into it now. Had a great dirt piece then, that was fantastic. But we're heading into Aberdeen and Clubby's starting to look for fuel. And the wonderful thing about this bike is I've still got 320 kilometres left. So it's liberating having that much fuel, it's just brilliant.
This engine is a joy to ride in this sort of country. It loves blasting along the open trails, but has tractable power to cross those streams lined with slippery rocks. The handling of the bike at any speed is confidence inspiring and perfectly complements that engine dynamic. Up until now, all the crossings had been lined with slippery rocks, and I had left the bike in Ride Mode 2 setting with traction control on. However, this crossing had a little surprise coming. It was lined with deep silt, and the traction control wasn't that helpful. The afternoon finished with some fast-flowing trails, with the occasional surprise of a slippery clay section. The engine was in its element climbing up steep grades at speed. It has a stack of grunt for this type of trail work. Erosion mounds are soaked up beautifully by the suspension. Not once during the day did the suspension bottom out. We arrived at Nundle to a setting sun and a cracking view. Time to reflect on my first day of motorcycle adventure on this bike.
Well, we're taking the Husky 701 LR on a 2-day adventure. We've banged out 375 k's and we're on Hanging Rock Lookout at the moment, overlooking Nundle. Sun's setting and we're about to go and have a bit to eat down in the pub. Yeah, this bike, the idea of this ride is to see if it's adventure bike worthy. Yeah, it looks like a big single and you could easily just say, oh yeah, it's just a big bike with a big tank. But there's more to this bike than that. This is a great adventure bike. We've got those twins. There's lots of twins out there at the moment. We're smothered in twins that can give us a different type of adventure. But this is much more dirt oriented. And the thing I love about this bike is you're not intimidated. You can come to a really technical trail and instead of saying, oh, well, I won't go down that because my bike's too heavy or, got too much luggage on or whatever, you can make an excuse. But with this, you can't. Like, the bike handles like a 450. Yeah, it's probably slightly heavier than a 450, but it certainly handles like a 450. I love the power delivery. It's a mellow engine, but it's always there for you. A couple of tricks and traps today. The traction control is really, really good, but I went into one of those 20 creek crossings and I had the traction control on and it had a silty bottom and the bike started like kind of stuttering it and I thought, oh no, I'm going to fall over and get wet. So I guess the point is, when you're going off-road and serious off-road, maybe traction control in those sorts of tougher conditions probably isn't the smartest to have on. ABS off, I've had that just about all day on the trails. The ABS works well on dirt, but you've got no rear wheel stopping. The front wheel is really, really good, but the back wheel, the ABS is, I've ridden a number of bikes, different ABSs. It's probably up there in terms of rear wheel braking on dirt, but I would advise against it. I just doesn't give me enough confidence, and I like being able to back out the rear wheel and brake just a little bit harder on the back brake. In terms of the traction control, it might be me, but I'm having difficulty sometimes getting or deactivating the traction control. I just don't seem to be able to get my finger on that button the right way. I think it's user error, and I think it's just me getting used to the bike. But once traction control's off, this bike has a different dynamic to it. You certainly find yourself being able to break traction in, coming into corners and out of corners and sliding the bike. With traction control on, at speed, it provides a very stable platform in the dirt, and it provides just a little bit of breakaway. And really, at speed on those faster trails, I don't have a problem leaving it on, but I do have a problem leaving it on when I'm going slower. It just doesn't respond like how I want to control the bike. I'd much prefer to have full control of the bike. And that's the beauty of it, you can just turn it on and off. Yeah, so all in all, I've been really impressed with the bike. 110 kilometres an hour, and I was hunting around for a little bikini fairing. But today we've been sitting at between 80 and 90 k's, and I haven't felt the need for it at all. And let me tell you about this seat. This is an adventure-approved seat. Now, you don't often hear me saying that for a KTM or Husky. Normally they're
they're made like a piece of hardwood, but this seat's been brilliant. Standing position on this bike is a little bit cramped for me. There are two things I would do to just improve the standing position for me. The first is these handlebars are adjustable. You can move them a little bit further forward. That's the first thing I'd do. And then I'd get a 3 centimetre bar riser or bar risers on the bike, and I think for me that'd just be comfortable. I find myself kind of just stooping over a bit. And the final thing, or two more things that had just knocked this bike out of the park in terms of an adventure riding bike for me. Obviously bark busters, but rally pegs. I find the pegs just a little bit small, but I'm spoilt like that. I mean, my pegs on my bike's like aircraft carrier landing pads, so you know, they're really big. Apart from that, yeah, it's been a brilliant day. Cubby's taken us on some brilliant trails, and all in all, I can't rave enough about this bike. And the final point, it's long range. So we've done 160 k's since we filled up, so I've got a truckload of fuel left.
Day 2, and with these cracking conditions and this bike, I've decided to take a day off work and just soak in the motorcycle adventure for what it is. Fantastic trails, out in the country, and getting some prime helmet time. The Husky eats up these conditions easily with no fuss. And the 200 k's on the freeway to get home were worth it. But at those higher speeds of 100 k's plus, my thoughts returned to thinking how much better these faster miles could be with a bikini fairing. This 800 kilometre 2-day ride had been a great opportunity to get to know the bike, and it had left a lasting impression as a dirt-oriented adventure mount. The features that had impressed me the most were the can-do engine, the suspension and handling, seat comfort, and that long range. The ability to go fast and far for an outback tour just sealed the deal. I think it's pretty clear from what you've already heard that the engine power delivery for adventure is outstanding. Despite gobfuls of power, the engine is very smooth in comparison with earlier models due to the addition of a second balancer shaft. The reduction in vibration was very noticeable to me, so much so that I liken the delivery of power to that of an electric engine. Despite this power and the considerable time I've spent in the dirt, I've achieved a very thrifty fuel economy that averaged 3.39 litres per 100 kilometres, or around 69 miles per gallon. The service interval for this engine is 10,000 k's, throttle control is fly-by-wire.
I found the gearing on the bike excellent for adventure riding. It cruises the highway well. It tends to be revving at around 4.2, I suppose. That's at a guess, at about 100 kilometres an hour. But it gives you access to lots of power to skirt around cars and move along in freeway traffic. And it can sit on those revs all day. It doesn't seem hurried or busy, and it's quite comfortable when you're riding at that speed. Lower down, I found the gears right through were excellent and matched with the engine dynamics. The only thing I would say is because the bike handles so well and because it's so dirt oriented, there's this tendency for you to want to take on more and more technical trails, higher level technical trails. And what I found was when I started getting to those upper limits of the technical trails, I found first gear was just a little bit tall, but I got around that using the clutch. But nevertheless, I just make you aware of that it seemed a tiny bit tall for those who are used to doing, that upper end of technical riding.
The clutch is activated hydraulically and has good feel and take-up. Having said that, big singles aren't as tolerant as twins when you make a mistake. As with the engine, it's pretty clear from what you've heard from me already that the suspension is sorted. Travel is a long 250mm both front and rear, and that's what pushes the seat height up, but it's worth it as this suspension soaks up the small and big variations in the trail. It's just a real pleasure to ride this bike. On the big hits, the forks and rear end just don't bottom out harshly. Equally as important as soaking up the rough stuff, the suspension is very responsive to that first 30mm of travel that I call trail feel, which is really important on long gravel miles to minimise fatigue. Compression and rebound damping on forks and rear shock is fully adjustable. Agile is the first word that comes to mind to describe the handling of the bike. What was surprising was that despite carrying 25 litres of fuel, the bike felt light and responsive even when moving slowly through more challenging trails. Yet, at high speeds, the bike had a reassuring stability. The dirt handling heritage is there, no doubt about it, but the bike has a poise that makes it ideal as a commuter if needed in suburbia. Stopping power of the Brembo brakes is well matched to the bike with a 300mm floating disc at the front and 240mm disc at the rear, more than enough stopping power on or off road for my liking. With long days in the saddle and in Australian conditions frequently at high speed for hours, in many ways ergos are far more important for adventure riders than dirt riders. The Husky 701 is regarded as a dual sporter, and the LR or long range version with 500k's range has certainly got the adventure riding community's attention.
The seated position on this bike for adventure is excellent. Most important thing for the seated position on long rides is the comfort of the seat. It's very, very comfortable, and after riding hundreds of kilometres on a number of day rides, didn't have any problems with it at all. The length between foot peg and seat and handlebar for my height at 178 centimetres or 5 foot 10 inches tall was really, really good and very, very comfortable.
I've already commented that for me the standing position is a little cramped and there is adjustment to move those handlebars forward, and my personal preference would be to install 3cm bar extenders. For those that will be riding long distances at 100 km/h plus, I would suggest a small bikini fairing to keep the wind off your chest and reduce fatigue. The cockpit is simple with just the basics, and I'm happy with that. Switch blocks are of high quality. Deactivating ABS required the bike to be stationary and to hold the dash button for 5 seconds and could not be reactivated on the fly. Changing to one of the 2 engine mode settings could be done on the fly with the throttle shut down, but I must confess I didn't manage to consistently and successfully master changing ride modes on the fly. There are fuel pumps for both the front and rear tanks with a switch that can activate either. I felt this was a great idea, particularly if the bike was loaded up for a big adventure and you could switch between the tanks to even out weight distribution.
I think one of the themes of my review is don't just consider this a big dirt bike. There's far more to this bike than just that. But when I turn to the headlight, yeah, it's very, very bright, but it's a big trail bike headlight.
Whilst the intensity was there, the throw and width of the light beams on either high or low beam wasn't up to the level of coverage that is experienced with the Adventure Twins. LED blinkers and rear tail brake light were very bright, even in bright sunlight, and were relatively out of the way and unlikely to be damaged. Many riders will look at this bike as just a big thumper with a big tank, but having experienced the bike for over a couple of thousand kilometres, it's the technology that improves the rider safety and enjoyment that I believe sets it apart and certainly sets the benchmark for big dirt oriented singles. And that technology is accessed by the rider with a couple of simple switches. We'll go to the ABS first, which features advanced logic Bosch technology for off-road conditions and is one of the best off-road ABS systems I've encountered on the dirt. It does provide rear wheel braking and on most dirt road conditions was fine. However, my personal preference for a bike such as the 701, which is light with quick steering response, is to have more back wheel control, so I turn ABS off. The motorcycle traction control, or MTC, on this bike responds in milliseconds, and a key feature is lean angle sensitive traction control. If the rear wheel rotational speed is disproportionate to the riding situation, it activates and reduces engine output. I see this as a great safety net for adventure riders on those long tar miles. We're always using tyres with a dirt bias that compromises the grip we could have with road tyres. There is a long list of adventure riders who have ended up in hospital giving a little too much throttle on a wet slippery road on adventure tyres, and this technology should prevent some of those accidents. Ride Mode 1 provides a sportier throttle response than Mode 2 and engages corner sensitive MTC, minimising wheel slip and wheelies. I call this the tar setting. Off-road Ride Mode 2 smooths throttle response, and the off-road traction control settings to the motorcycle traction control are activated, allowing rear wheel slip and lifting of the front wheel. Lean angle response is disengaged. I spent a considerable period of time in Ride Mode 2, and for the most part I found it enhanced my dirt riding experience, particularly when married to the Easy Shift gearbox. It allowed for some slip of the rear wheel, but kept you tracking and smoothed out my riding style on those faster dirt tracks. However, in the real slow, slippery or technical tracks, I preferred to switch off all ride modes and ABS. And that's the beauty. You can easily turn off this technology and just ride the bike the way you want. Interestingly, when I returned to tar surfaces, I would always select Ride Mode 1 because I appreciated the safety benefits it offered me. The Easy Shift gearbox is a great feature for both tar and dirt. Being able to hold the throttle open and quickly shift up through the gears without using the clutch creates a rush of acceleration. And downshifting is just as easy, which allows for strong engine braking. I had the most fun with the Easy Shifter on faster flowing forest trails, but it also was helpful during a long ride where it just makes changing gears easier and crisper. The slipper clutch proved useful a couple of times when decelerating hard into corners with slight corrugations. The clutch action is light. The Husqvarna 701 long range has impressed me greatly, so much so that I'm considering how I would personalise it for my adventure riding conditions. And I suspect that my adventure riding conditions are very similar to many people in Australia and in fact throughout the world. For me, I live in the city, and
to get out to the country and out to the trails, I have to do about an hour to 2 hours on freeway. And that freeway is sitting at about 100 to 110 kilometres an hour. And that's where the first modification comes into the fore for me. And that's a small fairing, a bikini fairing. Now, this one was off my KTM 690, and it's a KTM hard part. And what I'd love to do is just to have that on the front of the headlight shroud there. And the beauty of this little fairing is it's not too big. It doesn't interfere with very challenging dirt riding, but in the same breath, it punches the wind. You can see the profile on that. It punches the wind straight up over your chest and onto the bottom of your helmet. And that's a wonderful thing that reduces fatigue, particularly in Australian conditions, where when we get out in the outback, you know, we're doing 5 hours sometimes at 100, 120 k's plus, and it just wears you out. So that's the first thing I'll be looking at, a little bikini fairing. The next thing I do to the bike is raise the handlebars with a bar extender by about 3 centimetres. There is some adjustment on this to push the bars forward, and you can do that with the bar clamps, but I just would like another 3 centimetres so that when I'm standing I'm not as cramped as I felt. Other small modifications, obviously bark busters. I'd love a set of Oxford heated grips on this bike. I've found them really reliable, and I love the way how you can alter the heat. The other thing I'm interested in always on any bike that I'm going to ride for adventure is rally pegs. I love a big peg to stand on. It just makes riding much more pleasurable. Where I ride, there's a number of rocky outcrops, and there's a potential to crack the side casings on rocks, or the rear brake cylinder, which is just tucked under here, just under the rear foot peg. And you know, I'd like a decent bash plate, and that'd give me the confidence if I hooked up on one of those rock ledges, I wouldn't do damage to the bike. Final modification for me is a set of soft pannier racks, and I'd like to put my giant loop Sisky U panniers just over the back here, in a very similar setup to what I have on my KTM 690, which allows the weight to be low and forward and centralised. And apart from that, this bike out of the box is a great foundation for where I'd like to head in terms of modification of this bike for the way and the sorts of terrain I'm going to ride it in.
It's only appropriate to leave the discussion of the most impressive feature of this bike to the conclusion. The Husky 701 LR, or long range, is defined by a 500 kilometre range, courtesy of an extra fuel tank that gives the bike a whopping 25 litres of fuel capacity. There's no doubt about it, those tanks look big, but what surprised me, they don't get in the way and don't get hooked up, even in the really tight trails. The tanks are made of polyamide, an incredibly tough material that's almost unbreakable and can take the big hits. While my little dive into the sand could hardly be called a crash, it did demonstrate that even the white and yellow shrouds that cover the tanks are tough. In recent years, a number of mid-range adventure twins of similar capacity to the Husqvarna 701 LR have hit the shelves, and adventure riders are spoilt for choice. The smaller capacity market is also being filled with some excellent offerings. So where does the 701 sit, and who should be interested in this bike as a seriously capable adventure mount? I see this bike appealing to a number of groups. Firstly, the experienced trail bike riders keen to enter the sport of adventure but wanting to retain their dirt orientation. The riders waiting for that unicorn, a high-performance purpose-built 500cc single. And finally, more experienced adventure riders who are looking for a lighter, less cumbersome mount but a bike that still has the legs to make big distance in the outback and take on the tougher trails. The Husky 701 LR is powerful, light, agile and packed with technology that improves rider safety and pleasure, with a fuel range unmatched for a bike purchased off the showroom floor. This is a cracking adventure mount for Australian riding conditions and an outstanding competitor against the mid-range Adventure twins.
I thought we were in the Wilderness Clubby. What are you doing?
Well, I've got signal, and it's my old mate Decimal.
Decimal Dave.
Decimal Dave, that's the 17th text message.
Recording.
So what lookout are we on first?
Hanging Rock Lookout above Nundle.
Well, we've done 375 k's today and we're at the Hanging Look. God help me. Must be car parks. We've done 375 k's today and we're at the... Where are we at?
Picnic, just remember picnic at Hanging Rock without the schoolgirls. Running, recording.
Well, we're taking this bike on a 2-day adventure and we've banged out 375 k's today. We're on Hanging Look... Well, we're taking the Husky 701 LR on a 2-day adventure. We've banged out 375 k's and we're on Hanging...